Hey Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Really am.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for the conversation. I think this will be super interesting. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, you bet.
So to kick things off, could you share a little bit about your journey to product leadership? And you've worked across a lot of different functions, sales, marketing, strategy. So what ultimately led you to where you are today?
Sure. Oh boy. Um, so if you go back in the hot tub time machine and go way back, I was a software engineer. And so I describe myself as a recovering software engineer. So that's my roots. So I still itch and like to code, but I'm not allowed to professionally anymore. I've been so left behind. So if you go through my career, what I learned was I interacted with customers more. I interacted with investors more. And so what I found myself was becoming a chief spokesperson for the technical engineering teams. And so that was there's more to this than speaking to a keyboard, if you will. And so I began to evolve and work more in, startups in San Francisco, dealing with a few key customers and those kind of things. And then someone said, well, that's kind of like a product management function. And this is back in the 90s. So started to realize what product management was. And then in early stage businesses, as you mentioned, you think, well, we need to get some customers, other customers to buy this thing. And so I'd watch the salespeople and they wouldn't hit the points. So I've been a bit of a journey person, but essentially my roots and my DNA is technical. The skill that I bring is be able to talk to different stakeholders in different languages, basically. And so that's what I am today, I think.
I love that, and that's so important for product managers. And as you move up in your career in product management, the ability to understand and be able to communicate across the functions becomes even more important.
Yeah, for sure. And EQ at the heart of it is everything, right? You got to understand if you're connecting with the engineers or with the
Mm.
sales team or with the stakeholders, or yeah, the best product managers are the ones who get it and know how to have a conversation with anybody at any point. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's the
yeah,
missing part when people talk about storytelling, and the power of storytelling in product management is understanding the right story for the right audience and how you convey that message.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, the metaphors vary, right? So
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
So,
very true.
so today you're at Granicus. You're the chief product officer. To
Yeah.
tell the audience a little bit more about what is Granicus and what is your role there as the CPO?
Sure. So Granicus is, to give it a label, is a GovTech company. So we're 100% focused on the public sector. We have customers in the USA, and customers being cities, counties, state agencies, federal agencies. So we have customers in the USA, customers in Canada, in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. That's kind of our market footprint. And what we do is we work in an area of GovTech where government interacts with their residents, their citizens, residents, and businesses, so the communities they serve. So if you get emails from your city, or maybe Affordable Care Act is in full go right now for healthcare.gov, those emails flow through us. And we send these at a massive scale. We've got like 7,000, 8,000 customers, something like that. So we send over, I think it's 23, our customers send over using our system 23 billion communications a year. We have 18 billion web page views of .gov websites. So any interactions you have with the government may well be driven behind the scenes by Granicus. That's kind of our zone. And the chief product officer, it's a bit like what's a chief operating officer. I think it's different in every company. In the case of me and Granicus, it's the things I talked about on my career. So the team is nearly 600 people, to give you a sense of the scale, my team. And it's all the software engineers and quality engineers. Of course, they're fed by product managers, product owners, and designers. Then we've got the people who do all of the release management, so the DevOps people who keep systems and site reliability and all the computing who make sure everything's running on time and uptime and all those other things, security, and a couple of other roles as well. So it's all things about building, delivering, maintaining, and running the products. That's my zone. And by the
Wonderful.
way, we run in Azure, in AWS, and even in colos. So
Very
yeah,
cool. It sounds like a
yeah,
pretty big product organization. So that's, I'm
yeah, it
sure,
is.
never short of challenges.
No, indeed, and we've got plenty of characters. So yeah,
Awesome. So I was looking at Granicus's mission, and at first blush, connecting governments with their residents, you know, as a resident of the United States, and kind of the debate between big government and small government. I'm curious, do you
Right.
ever run across issues or product ethics questions around like what's the boundary between connection versus privacy?
Sure. It's a great topic, by the way, and it's a highly complex and nuanced topic. The last thing we want to do is behave like I'm going to name Target. They're in the Twin Cities where I live. You might have heard the stories where a father comes onto a computer at home and it's recommending kind of pregnancy tests, and that was because of the interactions the daughter had with the system. And obviously, we cannot have government systems we build for government that are invasive in terms of information. And so yeah, information is highly valuable. And so when you deal with, I'm visiting San Antonio next week, some of the colleagues there, and they're very thoughtful about what information should we gather and how should we gather it, because the communities want to know that we're equitable. They want to make sure that we're not just looking at white guys with glasses and sending them all information. They want to make sure that it's being sent to all income levels, to all races, to all education levels, to all districts within, let's say, a state agency and so on. But to do that, you've got to know who's receiving that communication. So there's this need for information to service to ensure that you're being inclusive, but there's guardedness about the information, what you do with it. So this has been a key topic, and it varies by customer. Much of our solution, a very significant proportion of our solutions have high certification for security and data privacy. They have to. So we're always allowing customers to change it. And I have to say, John, that the introduction of AI/ML and some of those AI/ML services that we're bringing to our customers really bring that to a fore. It's not just privacy data. It's like, and what are you using for training? And who are you training other people's data on my data? So it's got acute lately. It's an area we spend a ton of time and energy on interacting with our customers, but it's nuanced. There's no clean answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's product
Yeah.
management in a nutshell, right?
Tuesday. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
I do want to
Yeah.
get into the AI ML side of things, but before we get there,
Sure.
I've always had this kind of crazy idea, right? We have, the U.S. elections just happened,
Yeah.
and there's the ever going debate around like mail-in ballots, day of voting, and with what Granicus is doing of trying to like make that communication seamless. You don't have to answer this or speak to this if you don't want to, but I just envision a world one day where we can use technology to just, be able to vote from our phone or from a web portal.
Yeah. Oh, what an interesting question. So, a couple of quick things. So you can imagine with the government footprint that we have in the US, probably 5,000 customers, we had war rooms established because there's, bad threat actors from nation states wanting to bring websites down in key counties so that no one can see the
Totally.
results and all those things. So, we had a lot of defenses stood up, and we had a team working around the clock for the 24 hours before and the 48 hours after to no ill effect, because not much happened from a threat point of view, for what it's worth. But as you look at the ability for the public sector to adopt technology from the private sector that we assume in our private lines, there's this general assumption, I think, that there's a laggard due to lack of investment or lack of innovation. And whilst that can be true in some cases, it's actually the legislative regulated industry side of this that constrains some of it. Now, we know it's politicized right now. Can machinery work? Do you have to be in person? Should you show an ID? And those are debates I can't contribute towards. But in terms of the technology's capabilities, we know from our private lives that there are stable and safe technologies that can be deployed to this end. We have them, right, that would allow you to not just get a driver's license digitally, which we support, but to vote digitally. It's the same level of scrutiny that goes on. So I think this is one of political will more than technology. The foundation technologies are pervasive and those patterns are clear to everybody. But whether there's a will to do that is usually beyond the people we interact with in our
Yeah,
customer base.
that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
Personally, I hope we get to a point in our our history, or that can happen. So we can, technology is
Yes.
great for a lot of things, and I think it could solve
Yeah.
a lot of problems if deployed correctly. So
Yeah. Just a quick aside, John, that one of the things we always have to work with is multi-channel approaches because there's still Grandpa Bob who wants to go to City Hall. And so how do you satiate parts of the community that
mm,
aren't the digerati? And this may be a problem just for the next 25 years. So part of what we do is we give the staff on the desk the same access to the systems that we as digerati have so that they can help Grandpa Bob, if you will. So we kind of so there isn't a digital divide in the sense that the city worker isn't using something digital either. And so we have to do this multi-channel approach still. Yeah.
yeah. So like you
Yeah.
said, no end of complexity and nuance.
Yeah, right. Amen. Amen. Keeps me employed. Yeah.
For sure. So going into the AI ML world, I am curious because you've worked in government and across just regulated spaces in general. Like, what are some of the
Yeah.
trends that you're seeing that of the impact that AI, machine learning, and these GPT models, or kind of the whole gambit, right? What impact is AI
Yeah.
having on regulated spaces?
There's an interesting approach I take with some customers and in some public forums, which is I ask, leadership in government, how many people are using AIML regularly? And you get a smattering, 10 out of 200 people in a large room. And then you say, well, how many are using Google Maps or Maps? How many are using Spotify in the evenings? How many are using Netflix choices? And just keep to point out that, oh, no, 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 you're using Netflix, you're using AIML almost every hour. And so the reason you're doing that is because it's driving value. And so the message that is resonating is, whilst it was wise to be on the sidelines in the nascent days at the timelines of AIML, it is actually it's almost doing a disservice to the public not to embrace AIML safely and securely today. In other words, you're doing a disservice if you sit on the sidelines. And so AIML for government has profound potential, even more in the private sector. Really quickly, if you think of government, it is the largest service provider in the world. There's no other organization from state to local to, if you have a question about transportation, how can I get help with transport to work? It could be the city, it could be a nonprofit, could be the county helps you, the state might help you, you're a veteran, VA might help you, and so forth. These are really complicated arrays of services. And then the other thing that government is, it's a massive producer of content. It is arguably the largest publishing house, if you will, on the planet when you think of all the data that's published and captured. And if you think of what feeds the power of AIML, it's leveraging massive amounts of data to provide straightforward and simple access to the services that are germane to you. So it's like, no, we have a prerogative, not a permission, but a prerogative to do it. So that's the first thing, and that's starting to be realized by thought leadership. And there's generally a set of thought leaders at all levels of governments that we work with, and they're our customers. So there's that aspect. The second thing that we see is a heavy investment in legislation. So if you look now, that I think there's some 50 or 60 different state or federal level regulations on safe and ethical use of AI. Most of them following patterns that have been developed in the core, and arguably and ironically, most of them have been built by AIML for what it's worth. But those regulations are coming out. We're seeing the emergence just actually today, the emergence of at the significant cities and agency levels, we're seeing regulations and specialists in AIML being part of the recruiting process. So I think we're expecting an acceleration in AIML in government over the next 12, 24 months, but the impact to you and me as residents will be really profound because you can ask a Granicus chatbot, how do I get help with transportation? Because our customers are all these levels. That's kind of the promise. So it's like, this is the moment where Gov has all of the assets. When you think of private sector in retail as having all the assets, no, in this particular case, government's got it. They have a responsibility to tap into it. Get a little bit passionate, but that's where we feel on that stuff.
No, I empathize with the passion. I take public transport to work a few days a week, and I could see endless possibilities for how a government chatbot for transportation could be incredibly useful. Just in people that
Exactly.
I interact with,
Yeah.
myself, it's yeah.
Yeah. And people don't know who to ask, right?
Hmm.
Some cities we work with, San Antonio is one of them, that has information on how to get a passport. The reason
Hmm.
they do it is they get so many questions about, I need a new passport. And you go, well, that's actually a state situation. Go to state.gov. Do you know what I mean? But they get so many
Yeah.
questions. And so knowing which part of government, that's got to change. And AIML can do that. You don't need to be a master in political science to figure out if you can get, relief on your transportation bills because you're, low income. So,
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a little bit of a leading question that kind of dovetails from what we just talked about. But um, as a chief executive, a chief officer in product, what are some of the nuances about leading product for a like where government's basically your customer, right? And the leading part of
yeah.
this is, um, it's got to be. Well, I guess I won't be as leading, but I'll just let you answer the question. Sorry.
Sure. So, not to flog it to death, let's use AIML as the context within which how do you satiate different levels of customers? You can imagine a state agency is different to Lubbock Parks and Rec, which is different to the IRS, right? Just take those three. All three of those are customers of ours, and they're very different in their needs and behaviors. And then you compare the US to the UK or to Australia. So although they've all got the same charter and the same guiding principles, they're quite different in what they would prioritize. So what we tend to do in areas of emerging technologies, we have, for example, in AIML, we have customer advisory boards. And what's important is these are not marketing boards. Some cabs, and I've been there and I've done this, you use it to give an early sneak preview. You're a VIP. Let me show you what we're doing in the lab. And it's just, you're not really looking for a lot of feedback. You're looking for excitement and market anticipation, not to knock those cabs. But a real cab isn't one of those. A real cab is upstream, maybe on a whiteboard. Here's how we're looking to tackle privacy of data about people, but also be able to report inclusivity or whatever it might be. So we have cabs, and we have a cab in AIML in Australia. We have a cab in the UK, and we have a cab in the Americas, USA and Canada. And what's interesting is the UK, for example, they home in on optimization of resources as being their main priorities. So if you think of operational efficiency, doing those things, that's their bias and what they want AIML to do. You look at the US, and they're looking for more awareness, transparency, and participation of the community. They're not in conflict, but they're not the same. So we tend to, on areas where we feel there's a larger than normal breadth of interests, we bring the cabs together and we populate the cabs with both pros and cons. So I've got people in the Americas cab who do not like AIML, have been vocal to me about it, and we brought them into the cab. Let's have this discussion. So we try and be customer centric and let them solve the problems with us. And we say, how about this? And we come back and how about that? But it is a challenge. And the one thing we try not to do is to assume that behavior on meetings management is the same for the IT team on the website or the public relations team on communications. They tend to have different charters, and government can be relatively siloed. So what is developed over 20 years as their priorities might differ even within the same state. So if you go to the state of, you name it, Oregon, this isn't true, but by example, their priorities on websites might be different to comms, might be different on forms digitization, and you have to acknowledge that. So we try not to assume that one size fits all. And so our stuff has to be very configurable. I rambled there. I hope that's where you were looking, John, but it's not
Absolutely.
easy. Yeah.
I think cabs are amazing, like customer advisory boards. And to your point, I think a lot of times um, they're used as more of an echo chamber and a way
Yes.
to validate your
Yeah.
assumptions versus check your
Yeah.
assumptions. But I like the way that you use them because it's really customers who have a vested interest in what you're doing, but they have an expertise, and
Yeah.
they're really being
Yeah.
treated as advisors, right? Because as
Yeah.
one person or as an organization, it's got to be really hard to look across these different countries at
Yeah.
what regulations are coming down, what legislation is being passed or up for debate, and how do we
Yes.
anticipate and get ahead of these things. So I'm sure that
That's right.
CAB helps with that as well.
Exactly. And in fact, some of them are students, if you will, of emerging legislation. It's part of what that's what drives them right now, and they're trying to see. So they'll come to the cab and say, you should see what Georgia has done, the state of Georgia, and not our state, sorry, the state nation of Georgia. You should see what they've done. It's super valuable. And our team couldn't possibly have the mindset that our customers have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
not
kind of
unless you
where we go.
not unless you hire a bunch of people just
Yeah,
for
we
that
do
role.
that too, but yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. So, in these regulated spaces, compliance has to be top of mind. We talked about that. We talked
Yeah.
about product ethics. So, from from one another tangible takeaway that we can give to the listeners who are also working in regulated spaces, what is your definition or an example of what a good partnership looks like with compliance within your organization from a product perspective?
Sure. So this was similar in healthcare. The regulations vary, especially in regulated industries, by sector. Florida's regulations in healthcare are very different to California's regulations in healthcare. They've got same guiding principles. And so it is in terms of any industry, including the public sector. So the first thing we try and do is we work with standards bodies. NIST 853 is a classic one, right? Or PCI compliance, and what we'll do is we'll do a decoder ring, if you will, from the various other forms, FedRAMP, StateRAMP, TexRAMP, Virginia Commonwealth's IT rules, and we do a mapping back to this centralized common NIST 853. So in most cases, we'll find there's much more commonality to the regulations than is perceived from the outset, where it's like, oh my goodness, we got a whole new reg. And so that's the first best practice is do seek out the commonality. And most of them are based from a common place. And then, they're not trying to differentiate in the case of the public sector. So that's one step approach that we make and there's also government's more confident and they collaborate with each other at all levels. They don't compete with each other. Government's more confident when we're complying with other people's regulations too. So we tend to explain that we are, although it's not relevant to Lubbock, where the solution you're using is FedRAMP and can be used by the Treasury, the IRS, the DoD, and others. And so we make them aware of those regulations and suggest to them, well, maybe you apply that as a standard to all of the products that you use. So we become kind of standards spokespeople, advisors as well. And it's really difficult if you join a local government, city of Baltimore, I'll make it up, they have 220 different vendor systems that have been deployed over the years in those organizations. They have a really tough job of making sure they adhere to certain standards and what standards. And so expecting them to be at our CISO's level of comprehension is just a non-starter. So part of our service is to help educate them about the standards we follow, why they're important, and even imply you should apply that elsewhere because some of the systems you want to interface with our system, we know they're not compliant. So we end up being spokespeople for standardization more than other industries that I've been exposed to in the past. And we tend to concentrate more on those things than we do getting our systems all on the same database or shifting from Azure to AWS. We have heterogeneity of technology, but we have unification of standards, if that makes sense. And we had to bias towards that. So that's our living reality.
That makes sense. So if I'm understanding the essence of kind of your approach there, it sounds like there's a lot of collaboration across like federal and local governments to create these standards. So that way you're not having to have these like piecemeal solutions for different.
Yeah, usually a little close, John. There's a nuance that might be interesting to the audience, which is there's usually a point of a spear in the case of GovTech. So FedRAMP was the earliest, 2011, 2012. They started to set a high bar for cybersecurity. TexRAMP has a basis on FedRAMP, as does StateRAMP. So those evolved over time. And if we go look at PCI or other ones, so there tends to be like a leading one that was done well. If you go look at drone legislation, you'll find it will point back to one organization who did drone regulations at the local level first and did it very thoughtfully. So there's kind of a leader and a follower approach to how it propagates, but otherwise, yes.
Okay. So I have a more general question. It might be outside of building for government as customers, but still kind of in
Yeah.
the regulation compliance space that I'd love to get your take on for the
Sure.
listeners who might be having to, build within regulated industries, but maybe not selling to government.
Yeah.
I had a situation once where I was building for an HRS system, and we were building biometric clocks to do hourly
Yeah.
employee clock in and clock out, and we had to be cognizant of the various laws, state laws around biometric data, how you capture it, how you store it.
Yes.
And my approach at the time was, find the most stringent version of that law and follow that so you're good across the board. But I'm curious your take. Is that generally a safe route, or like how do you view risk when it comes to navigating those type of decisions?
Yeah, great. So if you think of risk and cybersecurity in particular, yes, go race towards the toughest, right? It's the weakest link that gets you. In the case of regulations that are around cybersecurity that are more nuanced, they might be driven because you're a blue state or a red state.
Mm.
Then I'm afraid the Venn diagram doesn't overlap as much. If you think cybersecurity, it's a lot of shared stuff. And those are super challenging. And I think mistakes I've made in my past, even here at Granicus, assuming Ohio will follow because Texas did it.
Mm.
And yet, and the challenges as optimists that we are in product management, we try and look for proof that yeah, they will. You get affirmation bias and confirmation bias. When in reality, I think you have to look for why won't they accept this standard that's adopted by a different state in our case? And it's a challenge. And there's still not a driving standards body that's trying to pull legislative things together other than cybersecurity and emerging AI ML. The rest of legislation, as you say, is what data privacy? Can we store information about whether you own a gun or not? Well, that very much depends on what state you're in. And so we've tended to get away from sensitive information that generates such blowback and played in safer places. That's actually the strategy we took, just pragmatically.
I think that's really smart, right? Because you have to fundamentally question, like, why am I capturing this data to begin with, and what are the second order effects
Yes,
of capturing it, and do I actually need it to drive successful
exactly.
outcomes for my customers? Yeah,
Exactly. Can I avoid that capture and still provide value? And if the answer is yes, then let's let that settle down. Yes. Yeah.
absolutely. Well,
Great.
Bob, this has been a fantastic conversation. I
Yeah.
personally learned a lot, so I know the audience has as well. But before we go, I have to ask, like, how
Yeah.
can the listeners connect with you? How can they learn more about Granicus?
Sure. Thanks for the question. By the way, I enjoyed the interactions and the full engagement, John. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. It's gone too quickly. So granicus.com is the best place. Head over to granicus.com. No matter what country you're in, you'll get to the right Granicus instance from granicus.com. It'll redirect you. And for me personally, just go to LinkedIn. Got an odd name that not many people have. So search for Bob Ainsbury on LinkedIn and you'll find a strange headline, and that's me. So that's probably the best way. I'd be happy to interact with teams. The best product managers interact with other product managers. So appreciate what you're doing and love PM community. Really do.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate you being here,
Uh,
and thanks for sharing.
yeah. Peace. Thank you.